Chapter 6 1. The Buick whispered along the road, skating tentatively on top of the snow. Trees flickered in and out of view on the embankment that muffin-topped over a concrete barricade from the car windows. Ed killed the radio and hushed Dawn with a pointing finger in the middle of his sentence. "Didn't we already pass this building?" he asked. "All these places look exactly the fucking same." Dawn gazed out Ed's window. He shook his head and craned his neck to get a better perspective. He frowned. 10720. "I thought the even ones were all on the right side." "Are you sure we're on the right road, Eddie?" Ed shot him a vexed glance. "I was just driving through here last night, damn it. I know where I'm going, Dawn. Look for a VFW haul coming up here by a naked flagpole. It's about a quarter mile up from that." Dawn nodded and peered out at the night, squinting his eyes into focus. A grumbling semi-truck roared by like a steel dinosaur, splashing the street with unforgiving light. The Buick rocked, impatiently, underneath them and stumbled toward the shoulder. Ed jerked the steering wheel back on course with both hands, locking his elbows into place like a bountiful captain at sea. It didn't make any goddamn sense. The bypass was already spreading out toward the highway again. Ed could already see the small bead of light that was the Dannerman Township rest stop, 2 miles or so up the road. He watched the bead of light swell to size until it was fully grown in the windshield. He guided to a stop between a faded set of parking lines. "Pull it up on your phone," he said. "I don't feel like driving back and forth anymore." "You gotta piss while we're here?" Dawn told him no and looked down at his shoes. He laughed without any humor. "Would you have really shot me, Eddie?" Ed stared at him, his face a portrait of slack disinterest. He picked a booger out of his nose, balled it up between his fingers, and flicked it into the ashtray. "You snuck into my house like Michael fucking Myers while I was waving a goddamn shotgun around. I should still shoot ya. What the hell was going through your head anyway, you crazy bastard? You know I don't sleep alone." Dawn averted his eyes out the passenger window at the lonely vending machines that stood together in front of the bathrooms. "Why do you need that thing, Eddie? What good is it when you really get right down to it? Nothing but killing. That's all. Hasn't there been enough of that shit already?" Ed chuffed and threw a hand into the air. It thunked against the dome light, jostling it into a low brilliance. "Everybody's a fucking romantic nowadays," he said. "I'm not trying to make any statements. I just don't want to end up looking into a barrel of one of them myself. Okay? We're not in Mayberry anymore, Dawn. You can use your fists against the boogeymen in this world if you want to, but that's not good enough for me." Dawn sighed. "It just seems like those damn things get the good ones as much as they get the evil ones," he said. "It's like they're cursed or something. I don't like 'em." A car pulled in behind them and parked itself 3 spaces down. A pair of teenagers in matching Kings Island hoodies emerged from its back seat and drifted toward the restrooms. Ed watched them without seeing. "Did you pull the address up yet?" he asked. "It's gonna be 10 o'clock when we find this fucking place. I don't want to be out here all night." Dawn reached into his pocket and produced his phone. Ed studied it with cautious fascination, watching Dawn jab his index finger at the screen. A woman's voice squawked out at them. "Head east on bypass 4, she said, with robotic certitude. Ed threw the Buick into reverse and headed for the exit opening at the mouth of the empty highway. He whipped it into a U-turn and climbed over the gravel median that separated 6 lanes of deserted road. Dawn reached for the ceiling handle hanging above his head like a transient subway commuter surfing a train car. 2. They drove on for 3 more miles before Dawn's phone intervened. She told them to keep right at the fork to stay on Old Carver Road. Ed followed her orders, riding the off-ramp that bent back toward the main drag. "In 1,000 feet, your destination will be on the right." The Buick slowed to a crawl and Ed watched for the traffic light that had halted him beside the strip mall the night before. Now, he could see the backdrop of the hill reaching toward the sky, half a mile up the road. Hadn't he noticed the pizza parlor right after he had come over the dip in the hill? He couldn't remember, for sure. It was all too vague and just out of reach for recall. Don's phone chimed in again, this time noting that the destination was 500 feet away. Ed frowned. Now, the hill was leering over them, only a few stone throws away, but there was no traffic light. The Buick coasted through an intersection that had long since ceased to function with any purpose, and there it was. It sat cloaked in a pocket of darkness by a shallow strip of woods and miscellaneous growth like a discarded, 30,000-square-footed shoebox. The decrepit lot light that he had parked under last night was a rusted post with a dark, rusted socket. He scoped the building for the little banner that had stretched across the parlor's door frame, but it wasn't there. "Where are we going, Eddie?" Don asked from the passenger seat. "This place looks like somewhere the Goodfellas would use to dump a guy after they were done with him." Ed hushed him impatiently, but Don was right. Something felt off. Ed couldn't quite place exactly what it was, but he was starting to feel uneasy. The whiskey he had indulged earlier sloshed inside his stomach, grievously. He belched under his breath and swallowed a sour stream of bile. The swatch of light that had shone out from the pizza parlor onto the street was gone too. The Buick's headlights splashed in through the dark windows of the building. Shadows frolicked around cardboard boxes and housing pillars that occupied a row of otherwise vacant, commercial rental spaces. The door that Ed had stepped through, the one that had welcomed him into the aromatic warmth of a bustling shop in full swing, reflected his car back at him, indifferently. A sheet of plywood painted with graffiti expletives was glued into place where a window had been the night before. He couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like the inside of the whole goddamned room had been gutted out. He hadn't been in there long enough to get a thorough look at the place when he was ordering his dinner, but he had a general sense of the layout. "Are we making a drug deal, Eddie?" Don asked, a touch of real concern raising his voice an octave on the last word. Ed ignored him. He frowned, scratching his head with absent fixation. This was the right building, wasn't it? He had checked the address 3 times in the yellow pages before hustling Don out into the driveway. And the same piece of siding that had hung from the roof of the strip mall's east side, last night, was still bouncing on the wind. Ed parked and shut the engine. Silence filled the car. He popped the drooping ring of keys free of the ignition and dropped them into his coat pocket. "Come on," he said, "we're gonna find out why this shithole isn't open. I was here at 11:15 last night. Tonight's Friday. What kind of a fucking pizza restaurant stays open later on a Thursday than the weekends?" Don assessed the strip mall with a dubious glance. "And it looks like they forgot to come back," he said, "and I think they've been forgetting to open up every fucking morning since." Ed laughed. But it wasn't funny. The whole thing stunk to high heaven. A siren way down inside of him, just below the stratosphere of his conscious awareness, screamed out truculently. He felt it as a muffled intuition, but his restless curiosity smothered the impulse to flee. He swung the driver's side door open on its elderly hinges and grunted out of his seat, motioning Don to do the same. The night air swallowed him whole, and his skin cried out for warmth. "Whatever you say, Eddie," Don said, and followed suit. 3. Ed peered in through the obsidian window glass of the parlor, cupping his hands to cut the glare thrown by the scant row of streetlights. It was all a nebulous dusk at first, but the pizza oven that had occupied most of the miniature kitchen wasn't in there. He could see the aluminum hoses and ventilation tubes that had once connected to it, dangling from the ceiling like mechanical stalactites. The open-faced refrigeration table that had held the sundry array of toppings was gone too. Rows of dusty orange floor tiles were exposed in a discolored patch where it had been when Ed had last visited. The life-sized maitre d' that had greeted him with its wooden smile and eerie good cheer was off duty and nowhere to be found. Ed's mind fought, desperately, to rationalize what he was staring at. This was bad, but there had to be some kind of explanation, right? Had he really gotten that good of a look at it, last night? Had he gotten a comprehensive look? No. No, you couldn't be 100% sure about anything you had only seen one time. And, although it was exceptionally unlikely that the place had completely gone out of business, the very next day, it was at least possible. Wasn't it? Sure, it was. Ed did suppose it wasn't commonplace for a business to do something like that without some kind of tell, however. There was usually the artificially optimistic going-away message, plastered anywhere you looked, when that was the case. And there was always the sullen, obligatory countdown to doomsday for the would-be mourner, simultaneously incipient and eventual. He thought of the old Blockbuster video beaming bright blue and yellow into the sky, out on Dixie Road. That was about 100 years ago, give or take. Ed had visited it as much as possible toward the end, like a steadfast relative paying his final respects to a dying cancer patient. It had eventually withered away to nothing, the sun-stained remnants of an oversized movie ticket shadow on its stucco facade the only evidence it had ever been there at all. That had been relatively sudden and unexpected, but overnight? No. Still, it was technically possible. It wasn't likely, but definitely not impossible. His mind accepted the notion with a kind of reluctant suspicion, but it would have to do for now. Because there was no other explanation. He had been in there. He had ordered a double pepperoni and mushroom pizza. He had not liked the condescending little prick that had taken his order. And now that he thought about it, that was all irrelevant, anyway. The fucking pizza guy had showed up at his fucking house for Christ's sake. Ed remembered the look of distant bewilderment on the kid's face, and the rage returned, flaring up like heartburn. He tried the door. It was locked. I hate to be the one to break it to ya, Eddie, but there ain't no fucking restaurant in there, Don called to him, from beside the Buick. Oh, okay, thank you, detective. Ed spat. His breath rolled onto the air in front of his face, changing dawn into a ghostly mirage behind its twisting veil. Ed felt a touch of fear and alertness caress his spine. Something really was wrong. He was starting to feel like the baffled victim on one of those old candid camera TV shows, his every move chased by the canned laughter of a studio audience. For Ed, fear and anger were first cousins. And when Ed got scared, Ed got mad. If this was someone's idea of a fucking joke, Ed wasn't going to be the punchline. Open the trunk, Don, he called across the empty parking lot, the levers underneath the driver's seat. Grab the crowbar and get your bony ass up here. Why do you need a crowbar? Don called back, yelling at the top of his reedy voice as the approaching roar of a township utility truck tried to drown him out. What, you gonna break all the fucking windows out? Just do it, Don. Ed squawked. His voice carried back to him, bouncing off of a derelict, 5-story building from across the street. Don shook his head and said something to himself Ed couldn't hear. He opened the Buick's door and reached under the front seat. A dull pop echoed over the empty parking lot. Don raised the trunk dutifully, but he threw Ed one last glance to make sure that they were actually going through with whatever it was he was planning. Ed nodded at him, impatiently, twirling his hand in the air. Don vanished behind the lid. There was a moment of metallic rustling, and then he reappeared, slamming the trunk hard enough to rattle the black row of windows behind Edition. He stepped up onto the curb, after negotiating the slick snow spots that were starting to stick to the pavement. I almost ate shit on that last one, he said. We're fucked if we get caught in a snowstorm out here. Ain't no way this place is on the salt truck route. Ed snatched the crowbar out of his wrinkled hand and jabbed its nose into the small slit dividing the double doors from one another. Christ, Eddie. We're gonna go to jail. What the hell's the matter with you, lately? There's nothing in there, anyway. I wanna get out of here, I don't like this place at all. Ed bent the crowbar toward his chest. The door whined, but it held. Nothing's wrong with me, he said. I'm trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. You would too if you saw what I saw. Somebody's fucking with me, and I wanna know why. Who's fucking with you? Don asked, stomping a clump of snow free from the bottom of his shoe. Ed ignored him. He hiked a boot against the door's frame, and bent the crowbar again, this time leveraging most of his weight against one leg. The frame bowed, but the door still held. Why don't you just peel that plywood out of that window? Don asked him. It looks like they didn't even bother putting any nails in it. Because somebody would notice that, numbnuts. Ed said, with the breath he wasn't using to muscle the lock. If you say so, Don said. We've done a lot of stupid shit over the years, Eddie. But breaking and entering in the middle of the night with a fucking crowbar? And there's not even anything in there to steal? What the hell are you doing? You tryin' for 3 squares and a cot? I'm not stealing anything, Ed said, jostling the crowbar further down on the door's frame. But I'm not going anywhere till I get a look around. Now, this place was in full swing last night. I was just in here not even 24 hours ago, damn it. I ordered dinner, dropped $11 on it, met a weaselly little prick who talked too much, and then I had it delivered to my fucking house. It was covered floor to ceiling in there with tacky Italian decor and cheap oil paintings. And the whole fucking place smelled like provolone and parsley. What, they pack up and move out of town the second I walked back out the goddamn door. Ed waited for another smartass, predictable retort from behind him, but none came. He turned around for an explanation. Don was watching him with a someone's putting me on, and we both know it expression, on his wind-chapped face. Maybe you oughta start drinking from a different bottle, Eddie, he said, his eyebrows knitted in caricatured suspicion. Shut up, goddammit, give me a hand with this. Ed barked, jamming the crowbar back into the frame. A squeal of metal meeting metal burned his eardrum. When I bend this bar back, look down into the gap. Tell me if you can see the bolt mechanism. He pulled it as hard as he could in spite of the small blister that was budding in the palm of his hand. Don leaned in, pulled a tiny flashlight from his coat pocket, and trained the beam on the door. I don't see a, wait a minute, move it up about 2 inches. Ed did. The crowbar's sharp nose caught on something and stopped. He wriggled it, testing for any give. Nothing happened. Push it up and twist it to the left, Don said, pulling on one of the door's handles with both of his hands. Ed twisted the bar. A hollow pop echoed inside the frame. The door pulled free in Don's grip. He flailed backward with the release, jamming his elbow into Ed's robust stomach. It hurt, but he was too exhilarated to notice. A low, dusty smell wafted out at them. Ed squeezed the frozen steel of the crowbar, and then he stepped inside. 4. This is bad news, Eddie, Don said, holding the breached front door open, in case Ed decided to rejoin him, outside. There's nothing in there, you drunk son of a bitch. And just because you don't hear an alarm doesn't mean there ain't one. This place might be tattling on us, right now, behind our backs. Hand me that flashlight, Ed said. You can wait out there if you want to, I don't blame you. But I told ya, I'm not leaving till I get a look around. Don handed it to him with mounting trepidation tightening his face. Why the hell are you in such a hurry to die, Eddie? It'll come, someday. I'd tell you to leave well enough alone, but you're not well enough. I don't know why I let you talk me into all your crazy shit. He said a short prayer to the sky and stepped through the door, following Ed a little too closely. It shut silently into place behind him. Ed dropped the crowbar and patted him on the shoulder. He plucked the flashlight from his hand. You're a good friend and a good soldier, he said, paying his respects with a curt nod of head. I'll go fuck yourself, Barrington, Don said. I'm not brave, I'm just cold. Ed laughed with resignation and pointed the flashlight into the parlor. It splashed onto the back wall, stirring up a flock of exaggerated shadows. A severed pipe jutted from a dark hole near the floor where he had seen the pizza topping cooler. A dead mouse lay sprawled on its back. It stared up at the ceiling indifferently with its tiny black eyes. Ed fanned the beam to his left. A makeshift office was burrowed into the wall. A swivel chair sat beside an empty desk next to a file cabinet and a stack of boxes inside. He stepped around the counter, listening to his feet echo softly. A walk-in cooler was hidden behind the office wall. Its thick metal door sat ajar like a bank vault, revealing a black wedge of darkness. The cooler reached all the way to the back of the room, where a chipped exit sign hung uselessly. "This place is fucking creepy, Eddie," Dawn said from behind him. "You still haven't told me what the hell we're even doing in here." Ed ignored him. He caressed the office wall for a light switch and felt nothing but smooth wood. He shone the flashlight at the ceiling. A lone light bulb popped from a fixture next to a small chain. He reached for it without much hope that it would work, but it did. The office warmed with a dull yellow pulse. Dawn trailed in behind him, letting out a small whistle through his pursed lips. "There's still electricity running through here? Sinovich. I wonder why the power company hasn't cut the supply yet. That's kinda weird, isn't it?" Ed ignored him, again. He reached for one of the boxes sitting atop the clumsy tower. It was heavy and awkward in his arms. He dropped it onto the desk with a musical thud, disturbing a blanket of dust into a swelling plume. It twirled like a puff of glitter in front of the dim light bulb. He tossed the flashlight to Dawn. "Look around for any restaurant garb out there," he said. "See what you can find." "I'm not sure I want to find anything else in here," Dawn said to himself. He faded back into the darkness, the beam of the flashlight cutting a path through the parlor's kitchen. 5. Ed reached into the box he had planted on the desk. He pulled out a bundle of papers and fanned them in a loose peacock's tail. He saw an old 1099 tax form from 2013. He saw a faded receipt for an oven repair and a benefit walk flyer for muscular dystrophy. There was a water bill from 2 years ago, with a blotch of stain defiling most of the print that had once been. It clung to an invoice from the Olmec Rubber Company, in something sticky. He tossed them aside and reached for another box in the leaning stack. This one weighed at least twice as much as the first, and Ed had to catch his balance once it was freed. He set it on the floor and parted the flaps that secured it from the top. A tangle of wood-paneled picture frames rested in a loose pile inside of it like a broken collage, each one casting a different snapshot in time. Ed pulled one of them out and held it up to the light. A small crowd of people stood perfectly still in front of a strip mall. They smiled at him from what looked like a bright, summer day, the sun scalding white in one corner. A man was holding a giant pair of scissors in front of a giant purple ribbon that sealed the double doors of a familiar-looking pizza parlor. Ed recognized him immediately. It was the portly man from last night. His smooth forehead gleamed with pixelated sweat, and his eyes were lost behind the bright smears of sunlight staining his eyeglass lenses. The kid that had delivered the pizza last night stood off to one side, staring at the cameraman with reserved contemplation. His smile was a half-hearted slit, but Ed could still see a row of crooked teeth peering out from between his lips. He grabbed another picture out of the box. This one showed a silver car with the same kid standing in front of it, one hand resting, boastfully, against its hood. The car topper, with the cartoon pizza man, was sitting on top of its roof. Ed tossed the frame onto the desk. It clacked with rude certainty. "Eddie." Dawn called from somewhere out in the dark. "Come here. Look at this thing." Ed reached into the box again. His hand brushed against at least a dozen more picture frames. He fondled through them, absently. The sharp corner of a Hallmark card peeking out of the photographic rubble dug, painfully, into the delicate webbing between his fingers. Ed flinched. He plucked it out of the box and studied it, solemnly. "For those of us, the blessed and the humbled." The shepherd walks where the fallen have stumbled. The words were written in sprawling, calligraphic script that scrolled across the card's flowery landscape. A small paragraph written in spotty, blue ink rambled beneath the message with flawed intimacy. John. Please stop blaming yourself. That is not what he would have wanted. You know that deep down. He loved you. I love you. And I'm scared. I can feel you slipping away. I know you're lost because I would be too. If anything ever happened to Jakey, I would curl up in the corner of the smallest room I could find and never show my face to the outside world again. But if I tried to do something like that, I know you wouldn't let me. So I won't let you either. It wasn't your fault, John. None of it was. You showed up every day without so much as a complaint. You tried. You tried so damn hard. I'm not gonna let you go. I will coax you out of that corner someday. I promise. Julia. Ed shut the card, staring wistfully out at the kitchen. The flashlight beam was cutting through the dark from Dawn's perusing hand, inside the pitch-black walk-in refrigerator. It slashed through the opening of the cooler door like the burnished blade of a sword. Ed pushed his thumb and finger into his eyes, rubbing and thinking. The fear that had been vaguely nagging, before, was starting to change into real fright. The impulse to hightail it out of the parlor reared up again, and this time it was more persuasive. Eddie. You comin' or not? Check this thing out. Ed started, knocking the side of his head against the door frame. Gimme a second, Dawn. I'm looking at something in here. He reached for the last box that was sitting alone on the office floor. It was sealed at the seams by a strip of blue duct tape. Ed slid it up the middle with the edge of his thumbnail, and peeled the flaps open. At first, he thought it was just an empty. But before he could shut it and turn to join Dawn, he noticed a small piece of paper standing up against one corner. It was hidden in the deep shadow, where the feeble light bulb hanging from the ceiling couldn't reach. Ed removed it, carefully. He unfolded it with hands that were now shaking with involuntary, Parkinson-like tremors. It was a newspaper clipping from 2015. Some of the print had been blotted out by what looked like blood stains. They fanned in rusted brown asterisks, spackling together in uneven blotches. The kid that had been standing on Ed's front porch the night before was looking at him from a grainy black and white square above the article's story print. He wasn't smiling in this one, so Ed couldn't see the crooked tooth that was resting behind his lips, but the same flap of bangs was shielding one of his eyes, and the same cartoon man pasted on his hat was still gleaming over a slice of cartoon pizza. Ed could see the banner on the strip mall window behind him, even though it was out of focus. Crowley's. His eyes trailed away from the photo, and locked onto the little paragraph underneath it. His breath snagged in his throat, and a rolling bead of sweat cooled his armpit. The Danner Man Herald. February 9, 2015. The body of a missing local resident was discovered early Sunday morning by a jogger in Bradford Park. Noah James Crowley, 19, son of John Crowley and Nancy Cumberland, deceased, had not been seen by friends or family for close to 2 weeks after leaving his father's pizza shop on a food delivery. His car was spotted on the shoulder of Route 4 just hours after he was initially reported missing, but Crowley was nowhere to be found. Foul play is not suspected at this time. Continued on page 5. Ed let go of the little square of paper. It somersaulted on the air, and then floated out of sight underneath the desk. His mind skittered for purchase, frantically organizing the last day, and a half into some semblance of rationality. It wasn't working. He could feel real terror welling up behind his temples and inside of his gut. His stomach gurgled loud enough to snap him out of the fight-or-flight paralysis that had frozen him in place. He turned to go fetch Dawn so they could get the hell out. A man Ed didn't know was blocking his exit at the door frame. He was grinning from ear to ear. Ed screamed. He cold-cocked the man with a reflexive haymaker. The man fell to the floor with a wooden clack. Abject pain spread up Ed's forearm from the knuckles, and his ring finger fractured on impact. He clutched it with his other hand, nursing the agony. He looked down at the stranger. He frowned, and then anger flushed his cheeks, replacing shock with bitter irony. "Holy shit, I bet he felt that one," Don said. He nudged the fallen maitre d' with one of his boots. It pivoted on its pointy, wooden nose. Ed glared at him. "Are you trying to kill me, Don? My heart is 62 fucking years old, in case you've forgotten. You scare me one more goddamn time, and I'm gonna choke you till you piss your pants." He held up his swollen finger in front of him. A sick throb vibrated into his palm. "I just broke my fucking hand. I told you to wait a minute and I'd be in there. Don't you ever fucking listen?" They're probably just jammed, Eddie," Don told him. "I wouldn't worry about it. And you told me to look for restaurant garb. I figured that thing fit the description. I'm sorry." Ed grabbed him by the collar of his coat and pulled him forward. "Listen to me," he said. "We're getting the hell out of here. Shine that flashlight at the floor so we don't trip on anything." "Why, I thought you wanted to look around." "I did want to look around. And now I want to go." He grabbed the flashlight from Don's hand and pointed it at the floor. "Okay," Don said, shrugging his shoulders, "but I still didn't get to show you what I wanted you to see in that giant refrigerator." Ed stopped. The ridiculous simplicity in Don's voice stoked the fire inside that was telling him to run to the Buick as fast as he could, but the sheer curiosity of such an absurd set of circumstances was at a close tie. "Just tell me, Don. I'm done playing Columbo." "Well, I would, but I don't really know how to describe it. It's pretty fucking spooky though, I can tell you that much." Ed stared at the outside world through the double doors. The Buick watched him, expectantly. He had passed up casual fear a long time ago, but he was already in the place. What the hell difference did it make now? Why go to so much trouble breaking and entering just to hightail it out when things got interesting? "All right, damn it," he said, "but hurry up. Show me what the hell you want to show me, and then we're bolting." Don nodded as if that had been the right answer, and then he headed for the walk-in cooler. Ed sighed and followed him, training the flashlight at the dusty tiles beneath his feet. 6. "What do you think that is?" Don asked, a touch of boyish curiosity making him sound like a Cub Scout, again. Ed didn't answer him. He shone the flashlight at the cooler wall, trying to grasp what the hell he was seeing. They looked like numbers, but they weren't exactly. In high school, Ed had taken a semester of Greek mythology. Most of what he learned had evaporated into an alcoholic haze once summer had come, but he held on to how the letters had looked because they were relatively familiar. They made sense in an equivocal sort of way, a number 6 without a hook, a letter T with a broken pillar, or a letter A with too many rungs. Sometimes it was a U turned upside down, or a triangle with a false bottom. Ed had squeaked by on a prayer and a whim when the final exam had accused him of not knowing a damn thing. He had had some pre-existing references for what he was looking at, though, and they had been enough to conjure up a D-. Now, Ed found himself grasping at the same mnemonic straws to process what was in front of him. Someone had finger-painted loose clusters of what could have been words if it weren't for a mess of tedious slashes that were preventing them from conjoining in any meaningful way. A deflated circle was orbiting a row of tiny rectangles like an alien moon. It dominated the center of the wall. Ed couldn't tell for sure in the distorted radiance of the flashlight, but it looked like they had been drawn in that same rusted brown color he had seen spattered on the newspaper article in that office. There was a word sprawling the length of the entire display, with its cryptic hieroglyphics. It scrawled underneath in a cursive drip. Topheth. It rang a distant bell, but Ed didn't know why. "Doesn't that look like blood?" Don asked from behind him. Ed's mind jerked him back into reality against his will. He tried to answer Don's question, but it got stuck. The impulse to run nipped at his legs. He didn't want to leave Don behind, but... Eddie? Are you all right? Ed blinked, and then full-blown panic seized him by the balls. What the hell were they doing in here? What the hell had he even been thinking? What if the cops were on the way, right now? How could he have been so fucking stupid? I'm gonna go start the car, he said, hustling Don out of the walk-in cooler's black depths. We're getting the fuck out of here. Right now. Ed hooked his arm underneath Don's scrawny elbow in spite of his apprehensive surprise and protests. They shuffled toward the parlor's lobby like a drunken couple. He was just about to barrel through the double doors to the parking lot when something caught his eye. It was on the floor tiles spreading out from the front counter. Ed stopped and kneeled down to one knee, knowing what he was going to pick up before his hand could reach out and grasp it. It was a $10 bill and a $1 bill, laying on top of one another in a half W. He held them up to the faint light shining in from the street. His face worked in little pouty gyrations, oscillating between fury and incomprehension, as if he were a sulking toddler instead of the weathered brute he had unwittingly become. We got company, Don said from beside him. Ed jumped and stuffed the 2 smooth slips of paper down into his pants pocket. He checked outside. A car was rolling into the parking lot at a slow coast. Its headlights illuminated the fat snowflakes that were drifting down from the sky. At first, Ed thought it was a police car. But when it turned to rest adjacent with the building's little makeshift sidewalk, he realized he had mistaken a triangular pizza topper sign for sirens and lights. Terror locked his muscles. It seized his heart with a cruel fist and numbness prickled into his left arm. When it passed, he reached into his pocket for the ring of Buick keys. Follow me outside. Slowly. He said. Don't look into that car. When I say run, you do it. Don grunted. What's going on, Eddie? Seriously, now I'm getting scared. Who the hell is that? Ed opened the parlor's door. A swarm of snowflakes ambushed his face, melting into beads of ice water on contact. The little silver car idled, noisily, to itself next to the Buick. Its windshield was a distorted reflection of the strip mall. The driver was hidden behind it. Ed stepped off the makeshift sidewalk as casually as possible. Don trailed close behind. Run. Ed said, sprinting for the Buick before the word was all the way out of his mouth. The pavement was slick, but the mystery of adrenaline lent him the patient agility of a gymnast. He grabbed for the Buick's handle when he made it, to avoid overshooting his momentum, and ripped the door open. He shuffled inside and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed and then it rumbled to life. Don still hadn't made it back. Ed rolled the driver's side window down with 4 jerky cranks, meaning to bellow his name, but there was no need. Don was taking the last few steps separating him from salvation. He sauntered over to Ed's window and leaned against the Buick's roof on the balls of his fists. Ed gaped at him. Are you fucking deaf? Get in the car. Now. Don shook his head with the equanimity of a preschool teacher defying a toddler. No, he said. Enough is enough, Eddie. I'm not going anywhere else with you until you tell me what the hell is going on. Don dash. No. Don spat down at him. His voice rang with a primal bass that Ed had never heard come out of him before. It wasn't like Don at all. And he was surprised into silence by it. I'm tired of hearing you say my name that way. I follow you to the ends of the fucking earth without so much as a question, while you hurry me along like I'm your little pet asshole or something. Well, you know what? Fuck you, Eddie. I'm not your lapdog, okay? I don't have to do whatever you say just 'cause you say it loud. I don't have to listen when you snap your fingers at me like I'm your fucking secretary. I got my own agency. When Mary died. The sentence broke apart, wavering on the thread of a sob. Don gathered himself together again, after looking up at the sky for what felt like hours, before gazing back down at Addition. When Mary died, I realized that she was the only one in my life who ever took me seriously. She trusted me. And she knew I didn't, you know. She used to tell me if I could see myself the way she saw myself, I wouldn't be walking around with my head pointed down at the earth all the time. And now she's gone. And here I am, still walking around, following you, and watching the ground. I didn't listen to her then, and I should have. So I guess I'm starting right now. I don't ask you for a damn thing, Eddie. I listened to all your crazy stories and half-cocked ideas, and all the reasons you're pissed off at the world, without so much as a mutter. But you ask a lot. Ed looked over at the little silver car idling next to them. It sputtered unevenly, expelling dirty clouds of exhaust smoke. Goddamn you, Don. You stupid son of a bitch. Listen to me. I love ya. Okay? Is that what you want to hear? I've known you for 40 goddamn years, all the way back to New York. And I love ya. Everything I've ever cared about at all, it's gone now. You're all I got left. He wiped at his eyes, defensively, with the back of his hand. But if you don't get in this motherfucking car in exactly 3 seconds, I'm gonna drive away and leave you standing out there. I really don't want to do that. And I promise ya, you don't want me to either. Don looked him over for a long time. He sighed and pivoted away from the Buick on his fists. When he made it to the passenger's side, Ed threw the shift into drive. He rested his foot on the brake, ready to peel out as soon as Don climbed in, but Don stopped just before resting his ass down into the seat. You really love me, Eddie? He said. Don. Please. All right. Don said, plopping into the seat and slamming the door with effort. Ed smashed the gas pedal under his boot. The Buick bellowed and charged for the parking lot's small exit plank. He glared into the rearview mirror, fully expecting to see the little silver car closing in on his bumper. The stubborn certainty of panic insisted it was there for a second, but there were only the vacant lanes of the bypass, trailing away in broken yellow dashes.